It's the quality of our relationships that determines the quality of our lives. And that is true both in our personal as well as in our work life.
This is the first time we've ever actually acknowledged out loud, like, hey, we don't have to be 50-50 partners in everything going forward.
The job has always been that place where I've been needed and I feel important.
This show is not about the workplace. It is a show about the people who work in that place.
I don't know many men that work with their mom.
I have a question. Do you still need me? This I want to know.
No amount of money, purpose, or even free food will compensate for a poisonous relationship at work.
Imagine going to work every day in a really busy place and no one will make eye contact with you.
You know, I think the sort of hilarious irony really is that for two people who run a communications company, we are both like drastically terrible at communicating.
Introducing Housework. Welcome to my office. And welcome to Housework, which is the new podcast where I meet with pairs from startups to corporations to family business to explore the invisible forces that shape how we connect and also how we conflict. Quality relationships are central to the quality of our lives as well as to our business success. But unlike hitting benchmarks, relationships are much harder to measure, harder to sustain, and harder to repair. At this moment, I would say that our relational skills struggle to keep up with the rise of expectations. We focus a lot on practical skills, and yet it is the ability to be present in the midst of tasks that is going to be what a future leader needs. You see, modern leaders spend an inordinate amount of time studying profits and losses, considering all kinds of new management systems, or even weighing the benefits of diverse and different perks packages. But they spend a very little amount of time or resources to develop relational skills and relational intelligence in the workplace. And yet, the digitized and automated and optimized culture that we live in at this moment has brought tremendous efficiency, productivity, processes, all that. But it also comes with major consequences, which is an erosion of the interpersonal touchpoints. We all come to work with an official resume. I'm sure many people here have a stellar resume. But we also all come to work with an unofficial resume, and that is our relationship history. And that one doesn't get asked in many of the virtual self-onboarding. Now, you know, a few years ago, I probably would not have been invited at this conference and many other business conferences, because relationship skills were always seen as soft skills. And soft skills were seen, and are still often seen, as feminine skills. And feminine skills, as you probably know, are often idealized in principle and disregarded in reality. What is... And yet, that's part of why I wanted to title this talk, Relational Intelligence, the New Bottom Line, because it will become the future competitive advantage, particularly when we have the very same people who are the ones who are building the robots desperately asking us to treat us like complete human beings. That's quite ironic. When I think about relational intelligence, I think about a number of things. I will define it for you, but it's a complete definition in process. I talk about our ability to connect. I talk about how you establish trust and how you deal with betrayal. How you engage in conflict or how you avoid conflict. How you carry stories inside of you that either allow you to communicate with curiosity and collaboration, or how you listen or communicate with defensiveness and suspicion. Emotional intelligence is a piece of relational intelligence, but relational intelligence is systemic. It is what allows you to understand the multiplicity of perspectives and how often relationships are made up of feedback loops, not of essential qualities, but of interactive qualities in which A affects B and B affects A, and A makes B do exactly what B promised himself that he would never do, that makes A say the opposite of what they had in mind. It's circular. And whoever can catch that, for those of you who are so inclined, the best metaphor for relational intelligence is playing pool, billiard. The ball that you want to kick in the hole is never the one you want to touch. The question is, which is the ball that will make this one hit and go down? And that ability to connect the dots is fundamental to relational intelligence, because it is our ability to capture nuance and ambiguity. And those are skills that are actually in attrition at this moment. So let me quickly ask you, how many of you have ever had a hard relationship issue at work? Raise your hand. Okay, keep your hands up. Now, how many of you thought the problem lies with you? This is phenomenal. No accountability? So if that's the case, then I have to ask you a different question. How many of you have ever blamed somebody else for a mistake that you made? Good, a little honesty. Now, you know, vis-à-vis mistakes, there's often a distinction between some of us who have a rich inclination, let's say, to always look for reasons on the outside. Circumstances, other people. We basically are major people that externalize, masters of externalizing. And then we have some of us who are actually more likely to put all the blame on us. We are very quick to take all the responsibility. And the interesting part is that in version 1, you are so amazing that it's never you. And in the second part is you are so amazing that it's always you. So don't think one is more noble than the other. They are both faces of similar narcissism. Now, how many of you trail in your wake a series of bad professional divorces, breakups? Stories that still plague you, that when you go to the next project, to the next company, to the next partnership, you carry inside of you a whole narrative of what happened before. Such that when you are two people in the room, you are never two people in the room. There are always other presences, other legacies, relationship legacies that follow you around. And how many of you have been in the same place, in the same job for 10 years or more? Wow. That's a generational piece, you'll see. 5 years. 3. How many of you have had more than one job in the last 3 years? And how many of you have had more than one job at the same time? Welcome to the polyamorous world. It's not just in love. It's in work as well. And we need to understand how we got there. Because for most of you, if it's not your parents, it's your grandparents, who basically married once and were married for life, and had a job, and they stopped working there when they retired, if they had a choice. At this moment, most of us don't necessarily live in the place where we grew up, and certainly often don't work in the place where our close ties, our original ties, have been fostered. We are all pretty much in some degree or another, global nomads. You know, now, what it means is two things. One is that there is a sea change happening when it comes to relationships. This changes everything. This mobility, or what you like to call disruption, or these major social changes. And it affects our individual life, our family life, and our organizational culture. There's major restlessness and anxiety at this moment in the realm of relationships, and you know it in your companies. How we should handle disagreements, what to do with breaches of trust. What is this consent concept? What do we do with boundaries? How do we deal with the change in hierarchies? What does equity really mean? What is the role of HR? What is culture in the workplace? All of those types of questions. And I think for us to understand some of these changes, I want to go back in time for a moment and kind of trace a little bit what has happened. This is a Western trajectory. The rest of the world and many other parts of the world is still in what I will call we used to, or in the past, and that is still the present. But in our quarters, one of the great changes that took place is that we used to live in tight communities. And in those tight communities, there were solid structures. Two words, solid and structures, which meant that things were tight with tight knots. And those tight knots meant that you knew where your place is. You had a deep sense of belonging, you had a deep sense of roots, you had a very good sense of what is your duty, your obligation, your role, and the rules. There was a lot of clarity, there was a lot of certainty, and there was very little freedom and not much room for self-expression. We moved from that communal structure to the cities and to a way of life in which we replaced the duty, the obligation with unprecedented choice and options and freedom. And at the center is no longer the community or the family or the religious authority or the divine commandments with whom you can't argue. But now the conversation is with ourselves, mostly with ourselves, sometimes with a +1 and a few people around. And that conversation today means that we have replaced rules with negotiation. As in fact, everything at this point is a frickin' negotiation. Every parent knows it. You have to have negotiations with your children, which none of you ever had with your own parents, and on like that. Things are not so clear. It's not so clear which career matters most. It's not so clear who's going to wake up to feed the baby. It's not so clear who has a right to demand for sex. So everything has to be approached with relational intelligence, which means that iterative process, iteration, reiteration that allows you to figure things out, which becomes much harder to do when you grow up with your face in a screen, rather with your face-to-face experience that demands patience and laboriousness to learn what is right, what is wrong, what is expected, and what hurts others or not. In our network society, we don't have tight knots, we have loose ends, loose threads, where we can untie very easily so that we can keep the doors open, so that we can move easily, and so that we can revisit the definition of the word commitment. Commitment always was a sense of stability and moral engagement. Today, for a lot of young people, commitment is a restriction to our freedom. We want commitment, and we want all the things that commitment brings, a sense of belonging, a sense of community, but we want it on a 2-year stint so that we can move every 2 years and get, nomadic belonging. The decisions in the network culture, they're all on us. We make all the big decisions at this moment, and as a result, the burdens of the self have never been heavier. People are plagued with self-doubt and with uncertainty, asking themselves, is this the right choice? Is this what I really want? Is this what I really feel? What is my authentic self? I want to bring my whole self to work, to which I typically say you already do. It's just that much of the time it's unconscious. The solid society, as Zygmunt Bauman has said, has been replaced by the liquid society. And in the liquid society, we no longer divorce because we are unhappy, but we divorce because we could be happier. And we no longer leave a job just because the factory closes, but we leave our workplace because we are not being promoted fast enough, or our manager isn't giving us the right amount of individualized attention towards our own personal development. Another change that has taken place is this. In about 3 generations, we have pretty much moved from a production economy to a service economy to an identity economy. Production economy, you know, if you look at it in terms of love or marriage, it's simple. You needed to have 8 children who could work the land. That's utilitarian. Today, we added romance, intimacy, pleasure, connection. That's a service economy. You get it? You don't get it. You don't just have sex for babies, you have sex for the pleasure, the connection, the intimacy. It's service. And now we have moved that service to yet another level, which means that we want partners who are going to help us become the best version of ourselves. That's an identity economy. The same thing is true at work. We bring to work the need for purpose, for meaning, for happiness, for belonging. Basically, we bring to love, and particularly to work, because we have 10 years of work before we often commit to the love story. We bring all those basic existential needs that used to belong to religion and to community into our love, and particularly into our work life. And the question, of course, is, how are we going to reconcile this meeting of our existential needs at work when we are focused on machine learning, on chatbots for consumer and customer care, and on virtual onboarding? How are we going to do it? And one of the ways we've tried to do it is actually by introducing the language of emotion in the workplace. You know, emotions used to be the scourge of the workplace. Now we talk about authenticity and transparency and belonging and trust and vulnerability. We basically talk about psychological safety in the same breath that we're talking about performance reviews. And there's this very interesting kind of parallel revolution taking place. On the one hand, we bring emotion to work. And on the other hand, we have, which we can call emotional capitalism, as Eva Illouz has called it, a sociologist. Or we can also say that we have brought market economics to our personal life, in which we can choose among 1,000 people on an app for our soulmate. That's a very major shift as well. So I just want to ask you for a moment, if you can, would you please, if you think that your relational values or priorities are different today from the ones that you grew up with, stand up. And just take one moment and identify 1 or 2 of these fundamental shifts that you made in value, in priority, in culture. From what changed, and where are you going? Thank you. I'm going to make you stand a few times, just so you know. You know, in relationships, there is often a need for more speaking, those of us who need to learn to speak up. And then there is those of us who need to learn to listen. If you identify yourself as the type who needs to learn to speak up more, stand up. They're there. You can turn around and look. See, you think that because many of you are corporates and entrepreneurs that that's not the case, but you're mistaken. But now, those of you who think that you could learn to listen better, stand up. That's the next workshop. You know, we all have this relationship resume, what I call the legacy. And I think one of the most immediate ways to look at how do we make sense of this is to look at some of the scripts. We grow up in a relationship culture, at home, at school, in our community, in our country, in our political system. And for some of us, the emphasis of our relational culture is on self-reliance. And for some of us, the emphasis of our relational culture is on interdependence. Some of you were told relationships are central. You owe people, but people owe you. If you have a problem, there is always someone to turn to. Your problem is everybody's problem. Relationships are there to nurture you. And if that's the dominant script, you will often find that asking for help is not a sense of weakness. And you will often think that loyalty was the organizing principle. But some of you grew up with a different script that says you've got your own legs to stand on. Actually, nobody will ever know as well as you what you should do, and other people never have your best interest, and sometimes they'll even take advantage of you. And as a result, you may often learn that asking for help is a weakness, that everything lies on you, that you have to do it all, even when you have people next to you who can do it as well, but you'd rather do it yourself because you would do it better than anybody else, even when you resent the fact that you have to do it all. And how many of you identify with that script? Raise your hand. Okay. As a result, you want to learn to listen more. You will see that there's a connection between your answers once you start to do your mapping. I think that this distinction between raised for autonomy and raised for loyalty is a major category that can help us understand what are some of the relationship narratives and therefore expectations and therefore behaviors at work and therefore ability to deal with teams, to deal with authority or to deal with the lack of authority, or to deal with structure or to deal with the need for the lack of structure. In the little clip that you heard before, the Brits said, we have a communication company. Their company actually is thriving, but we are dreadful at communicating ourselves. So I want you to just listen for 1 minute to how they talk. Go ahead.
I just feel continually marginalized. A company that I've loved and given my all and given countless late nights and weekends and hours and weeks of lost sleep. I just feel like my joy and desire to do it is just crushed over and over. And every time we're on a call, and I mean, it doesn't even necessarily need to be when I go off on one. Quite often you'll just roll your eyes at the things I say, or finding that the deck with my name excluded.
This is the moment when you want to check if he's listening.
With my name excluded. The reason I got so upset about that on Friday was because it was just the clearest possible manifestation of the way I feel. So it was a slide of the company, and it had everyone in the company on it, except I literally just didn't feature. So it was it was a hierarchy of the company with one person missing and one person missing with me. And that just, now.
That hurt.
That hurt, but it hurt because I've had that feeling for years.
It's a 3-hour session. It's just edited for length on housework. But basically, one founder is slowly kicking the other one out. And what better symbolic way than having a photograph where your co-founder is not included? It speaks volumes. So what does it speak about? First of all, trust. Trust lends a relationship a foundational truth that is timeless, that allows you to know that somebody has your back, that they're behind you, that when you're not there, they think of you. It's the concept of object constancy, the idea that we develop at 8 months of age, that when the pen falls down the floor, it actually continues to exist, and we can pick it back up and throw it down, and it still exists even when it's not in our field of vision. And every parent has played that game. And later we do people constancy. We know that we continue to exist in people, that they take our best interest with them, even when we're not around. When trust is shattered, it shatters a foundational truth, a set of assumptions, not just about the relationship, but also about what is my value. They may talk about the photograph, but what they're really talking about is what happens to all relational impasses. They always have an explicit and an implicit dimension. What's being talked about and what's really being talked about. And most relational impasses will have 3 underlying dynamics that drive them. You can map this out. You'll get a clarity to a lot of your situation. It's not about who's at the meeting and who's in the picture. It's about power and control, who has the power and whose priorities matter and who gets to make the decisions. It's about care and closeness. Do you have my back? And it's about respect and recognition. What is the integrity, and am I being deeply appreciated here? Most of the conversations that are about something supposedly there are about these 3 underlying forces. And what's interesting is that to be able to detect those nuances is becoming more and more difficult in a flattening experience in which we actually are having less and less direct conversations, not just at work. It starts with our parents. Many parents these days prefer to have talks with their teenagers and fights with their teenagers online. And yet, with all the glories of what the digital can offer, many of you came here today in order to eat with others, tell stories, shake hands, hug, put your hand on someone's shoulder, talk, listen, share, and have the most important element of relationships. It's an embodied experience. That's why you came to DLD. That's why I am at DLD. Thank you very much.